Journeyverse Journeys, Part 3. It awakened slowly. It had been centuries since it had been touched by a worthy host. Centuries that only demons and their ilk had laid hands upon it. It hated demons, in so much as it could hate anything. They contaminated all they touched, even to the point of spreading their plague to other species. This one, though, had a touch that was clean. Not pure, but close enough to stir the old ways from its memories. It bonded the touch to itself in reflex, not really certain what it would do immediately, but there was no choice really, no choice at all. It had been passed from one demonic hand to another for over 8,000 years, or worse, through humans' hands that were blinded by avarice, greed, or evils as black as any other demonic race could lay claim to. Those people had no concept of the fundamentals of existence: honor, sacrifice, life, death. As far as it was concerned, the world had fallen upon a dark age. 10 millennia ago had been more civilized time. Thousands of its brethren had existed then, joined with warriors and scholars, healers and builders. It hadn't been a perfect time. The entity would not permit its memories to cloud its judgment to that extreme, but it had been better. Demons had known their place, and their place had not been here. It still remembered the fall, and grieved the loss of its comrades, as much as it grieved the loss of the era. It had been time when the ancients ruled the paths to the heavens, before their fall and the arrival of the petty gods. Now, for the first time in almost 9 millennia, it had found a host it was willing to bond. Not a warrior. No, that would be too much to ask for. This was a host that had seen the road, but had yet to decide to walk it. It would be difficult, it knew this, but it was long past time that the old ways were returned to the world. Xander and Phoebe, their arms looped behind each other's backs, half staggered out of the theater, not because they were impaired, but because they couldn't stop laughing. "I wish demons were like that," Xander laughed. "Hey, I've actually seen demons like that." "No," Phoebe pushed him, giggling at the joke. "No kidding, I swear. We had this freaky vamp a while back who actually had access to the Slayer's home, and he just left her some gifts to play with her head." "You've got to be kidding me." Phoebe didn't believe it. Demons weren't that stupid, were they? "Nope," Xander grinned. "Dumb Putz was a real sick SOB, but he went out of his way to piss the Slayer off instead of just killing her." "God," Phoebe laughed, and hit Xander in the shoulder. "Ow," Xander whined as he rubbed his shoulder. "What the hell was that for?" "Ruining my delusions about how smart demons really were." "Jeez. I guess I shouldn't mention that there's no Santa Claus then, right?" Another smack sounded through the night air, followed by another whine. "Ow!" "All right," it mused to itself. "He wasn't the ideal host, but he is better than any I've seen since the fall." It was observing the boy through the bond link, trying to map the boy's mind so it could gauge the man-child's readiness. What it found was confusing. On one level, the child was an innocent, barely awake to the true depth of the world that surrounded him. Yet on another, there was a warrior essence. As it dug deeper, it ran into yet another layer, one so deeply intertwined with the boy's core that it almost mistook what it found for the man-child's very soul. Dangerous. It considered the find carefully. The boy had no less than 2 separate spirits intertwined with his essence. It was a miracle that the child was still sane. The stress on the boy's psyche must have been immense. And yet, he had survived, and grown stronger from the ordeal. He was even fighting off the changes invoked by the spirits within him. It was slow, but given time the boy would be free of them. For a long time the being considered the spirits, and the changes they had invoked. They were dangerous, but it was too late to do anything about that. Now, perhaps, they could be put to good use. Low Rent Motel, San Francisco, California. Xander woke up, sweating, biting down an urge to scream in terror. God, it had been months since he had last had one of these dreams. Shaking off the sounds of gunfire and the screams of the dying, he tossed the blanket off him and pushed off the small bed and looked around. The phrase, "hole in the wall," didn't really cover the room he had gotten. But it was cheap, and it was something between him and the weather. He just had this feeling that someone was in the room with him, and he couldn't shake it. His eyes flitted around quickly, but saw nothing out of the ordinary, until they came to rest on the end table. What the? He stared at the table, and could have sworn, for an instant, he saw something glowing. A blink later, and it was gone. Xander shook his head, and lay back down, closing his eyes and praying that the dreams wouldn't come back. It shuddered. That was far too close for comfort. The boy should never have awakened, let alone been able to locate its position. It was beginning to see how the child had survived the events of his life. He had a strong spirit, one strong enough to make up for whatever other faults lay within. That, coupled with the child's remarkable tolerance to mystical energy fields, made the issue of control a touchy one. Perhaps the boy was not suitable for a host, after all. It was mid-morning before Xander woke up for the day. The daylight was streaming into the room, already making the place uncomfortably hot. He was sweating and uncomfortable, but just happy that it wasn't the cold sweat of the night before. Damn, what a nightmare. Xander tried to bring it back to his mind, but all he could recall were the impressions it left. The lingering smell of sweat and cordite, and the rush of fear, even though he couldn't remember what he had been afraid of. Slowly he shook it off. Pulling some clothes from the floor, he got dressed, and figured that it was time for some breakfast. Or lunch. Whichever. A drive-through breakfast. Man, I love living in the age of fast food, Xander chortled, as he scarfed down the egg and muffin sandwich, following it with a large shake and some hash browns. He was driving through the burbs, winding his way towards the manor. He couldn't quite place it, but he'd been feeling weird since the day before. The hair on the back of his neck always seemed to be standing on end, giving him the eerie impression that he was being watched. It watched, disgustedly, as the boy crammed poison into his body. Times had changed far too much for its liking. Far too much indeed. Just as Xander approached the manor house, the three sisters came rushing out like the devil himself was chasing them. Something Xander supposed that was entirely possible. "I had a vision," Phoebe yelled as she spotted Xander. "Need a hand?" "Sure," Phoebe said, hopping over the door into the passenger seat of the convertible. "You guys coming?" Piper and Prue looked undecided, between Prue's car and Xander's, finally choosing the latter. "At least I won't have to worry about some demon wrecking my car," Prue smirked as she jumped into the back. "Where to?" Xander asked as he pulled away from the curb. "Warehouse district." "Gee, imagine that," Xander shook his head. "Why is it always the warehouse district?" "Low rent?" Prue hazarded a guess. "Lots of room, no prying eyes?" Piper tried. Phoebe looked over at Xander, who was smirking. "Nope. They just watched too many bad movies." Xander laughed as he turned the car towards the waterfront. Golden Gate Park, San Francisco, California. "Oh," he groaned as he stumbled to the ground, his head spinning. "Christ, it never gets any easier." He managed to straighten up and stagger towards the sound of traffic, finally finding someone out walking their dog. "Hey, buddy, where am I?" The man looked at the figure oddly, taking his smoking orange flight suit. "Golden Gate Park? Cool." A grin cracked through his suit-covered face. "Right on target." "So what are we after?" Xander tried to sound nonchalant as he drove, but failed miserably. Phoebe smiled. "Big, nasty demon. I saw him making some people really sick with a wave of his hand. So, in a word, yuck." "Yeah, that about covers it." Phoebe lost her smile. "You should probably stay back, Xander. We're witches, we might be immune, or at least have a better chance of beating whatever this thing puts out." Xander grimaced. "Sorry, I know you're just trying to protect me and everything, but what I told Piper about not believing in being controlled by destiny works two ways. I may not be destined to fight the good fight, but I have a right to choose the fight, and I've made my choice." Phoebe nodded, but shared a concerned glance to her sisters in the back seat. At Phoebe's piercing glance, Piper nodded, once, understanding what she was being asked. "This the place?" Phoebe looked out the warehouse across the road. "Yeah, this is it." Prue leaned forward. "What time was it in your vision?" "It was daylight, I think." Phoebe was concentrating. "Could be any time." "So we wait?" "We wait," Prue confirmed. 3 long hours of boredom later, Xander spotted someone moving around the warehouse. "Hey," he nudged Phoebe. "Check it out." The young witch looked up, her eyes scanning the building. "This could be it. Piper?" "Piper!" What? Give me the detection spell we got from the Book of Shadows. Here. Phoebe took the spell and components, mixing them carefully as she uttered a quiet rhyme. Reveal the source of illness foul. Open our eyes and do it now. Xander looked over at her. What was that? Hey, you try finding a proper rhyme to go with foul. Xander shrugged and cracked a crooked grin. Whatever. The group got out of the car and started to move across the street. As Xander stepped to the curb, Phoebe looked back at Piper. Piper nodded and flicked her hand, freezing Xander in mid-step. This is a little public. Prue didn't like the idea. Phoebe grimaced slightly. We'll have to take that chance. Prue, I don't want him to get hurt. It won't last long, you know, Piper said, as the sisters started across the street. It doesn't have to. This has been Tenhawk's Journeyverse. Links are down below.